Welcome to the Grief Dreams podcast, where we have conversations with guests about their life, loss, grief, and of course, grief dreams, which can be dreams of the deceased. If you want to know more about the topic and your host, please visit the website griefdreams.ca. To support the podcast, please go ahead and rate it. For additional ways to support the show, please see the episode show notes. Before I move on with the show, I would like to give a territory acknowledgement. Long before Canada was formed, the Stalo people were the original land stewards, and they have lived here since time immemorial. They continue to live in the unceded Stalo territory known to settlers as the Fraser Valley and Lower Fraser Canyon of British Columbia. I recognize and honor the contribution that Indigenous peoples have made and continue to make to our community and the topic of grief dreams. Welcome to the Grief Dreams podcast. Thank you again for joining us. So today we have Nina Rodriguez. And Nina is the founder and host of the Grief and Light podcast, created after the unexpected loss of her only sibling, Joseph, after an authentic exploration of grief and life after loss. Beyond the podcast, Nina extends her heart-centered support through monthly circles, personalized membership, speaking engagements, active presence on social media, and in-person retreats. She has completed the Grief Care Professional Certificate Program under renowned psychotherapist and best-selling author Megan Devine, which we actually had on here on episode 89. And so you can find out more about Nina at griefandlight.com. And so, Nina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Black. It's an honor. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's really great to chat with you again. I know I was able to come on your podcast and we chit-chat a little bit about the dreams you've had after your brother died, and you've had over 200 dreams. So I'm really excited to talk to you and to really explore some of those dreams and some of the meanings that you received from that, because I know some of them actually help with important decisions within your life. And so I guess to first begin, tell us a little bit about your brother.
Sure. So he was my younger brother by 3 years, only sibling, my little baby brother. And unfortunately, he passed September 11, not the September 11 that everybody remembers, but the one that really turned our lives upside down. It was in 2019. And he was funny, is one of the first words that comes to mind. He brought so much lightness to our lives. My parents and I are all Tauruses. So that's very grounded, heavy, serious, stubborn energy. And he was just the lightness in our home. So that's one way to describe him. He was amazing. Always had this old wisdom, old wise spirit about him. And he was very interested in technology and very interested in things he was very touched by things that were unjust in the world. So he felt like a big sense of justice and care for the important things in the world. He was sensitive almost to a fault. And, that could be part of the reason why he's, struggled with addiction throughout his life, unfortunately. But ironically, right before he passed, we actually had the most hope we've had in a long time in terms of his recovery, and we really thought this was it, the it. If anybody's dealt with addiction, you know what that feeling is. You really have hopes. He was doing so well. He had plans for the future. He was in recovery. He was doing well. And on September 10th, it was his birthday, his 32nd birthday. That was a Wednesday, I believe, or midweek. And I'm working. I lived an hour away at that time. I'm working late, 7:30 p.m. And all of a sudden I think, I'm just going to drive up there just to give him a hug and wish him happy birthday for no reason. I normally wouldn't do this. And so I told my husband and I say, do you mind if we just drive up there? I know it's an hour. I know it's like, doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but I just really feel like I want to give him a hug. So we ended up going, and I called my parents. They ended up showing up, my uncle. So we all had this impromptu birthday for my brother. And I remember that night, and I actually recorded it. I have the video of this. My mom randomly started talking about the day he was born and how she remembers his birth and all these things. And we didn't think anything of it. There was a full moon and he jumped into the pool, and with his clothes on, because we were just like, what are you doing? Like, and I'm thinking, this kid is going to drown. Like, what's going on? He's so wild and random. And why would he do this? And of course, now we didn't know he was going to pass away the following day. So looking back on it, it was just this weird goodbye that we didn't know what was happening at that time. So in any case, the next day, to make the story as short as possible, he FaceTimes me at around 6 o'clock. He was heading to our grandmother's house because he was going to meet my uncle, who was dropping his dog off so that my brother could take care of it for the weekend. My uncle was going out of town, and this dog was like very old, and my brother was going to take very great care of him. And so I'm FaceTiming him. He's telling me that he's going to grandma's house. He's outside, so the sunset is on his, you can see the sunset, that golden glow on his face. And I remember thinking he looks so angelic. And that was interesting because I never use that word. That's not a thought that I don't look at him and think angelic, not because he wasn't, it's just not a word I use. But I remember in hindsight, that being a very interesting choice of word. And 2 hours later, I get the call. And, my father told me. I got very angry. I said, why would you say that? I said it not as nicely. I said, what's wrong with you? Why would you ever say something like that? And he told me, no, it's real. And that's when everything changed. So September 11, his newly minted 32nd birthday, he didn't even get to, enjoy it a full 24 hours until we got that call. Yeah.
Wow. And so how did he die? Because that was so unexpected.
So the short answer is we don't have the full story to this day, but from the information that we do have, we think he met up with somebody that gave him something that was laced with fentanyl. And so, because that's what the toxicology report revealed, that there were various substances and one of them was fentanyl, and we think that's what happened. So he was at my grandmother's house. My uncle found him there.
Wow. Oh my God. That is really upsetting and so horrifying because you said like you had this idea of his hope, right? On what's going on in the future. And it's just like you never know with these drugs with the fentanyl now. Like even in like British Columbia, it's such a huge problem.
It's
And
awful.
I remember someone saying to me that like people are getting murdered because they're not knowing that there's fentanyl in the drugs, right? Like if they did, they wouldn't take it. And so there's this like substance that's murdering people and people aren't seeing it that way, right? And I think
Thank you
that's
for thank you for pointing that out, because a lot of people say, oh, he overdosed. And I say, no, he didn't. Overdosing is, there's a presumption that you know what you're taking. And so with fentanyl, you say they were poisoned because that's what it was. They didn't know that was there, and it ultimately took their life. So there's a nuance there, and it's important to point that out. So thank you for that.
and so does that change how you grieved in any way? Because I know like different loss and different ways people die can complicate and can sort of have an impact on the way you process your grief. So was that a part of your grief story at all in the sense of how you like were thinking about it?
100%. And, we questioned who he met up with. We were unable to access his phone records, even with the police, even with investigators. They said there was nothing they could do. And we wanted to know if somebody did it intentionally, but even then we've learned since that it's extremely hard to prove. Even if you know who it is, it's very difficult to prove and get somebody, to pay for their crime if that was the intent, if that happened on purpose, if that was done on purpose. So we have hunches as to who we think it was and all these things, but nothing that we can prove. So, but speaking of dreams, one of the dreams actually my husband had a few weeks afterwards was he met up with my brother, and my brother said, why do you think he killed me? Why are you guys thinking he killed me? And it was posed as a question, and there was no answer to that. But I thought that was interesting that he would say that in the dream, right? It's almost like he heard these conversations and he knew we were wondering what happened, what exactly took place. And yes, it took, the grieving process is complicated because he was very young, happened very suddenly. It's the finality of the loss is very shocking to the system to this day. And it affects, there's so many more questions than answers for the rest of our lives.
That's such an interesting dream too. The question of like, why do you think that? Because it makes you question your beliefs and like, why is that your presumption? Because like
Right.
fentanyl is just isn't a lot of stuff like unknowingly that
Right.
is being sold. And so I think it's just, yeah, it's an interesting question.
It is very interesting.
Did it help at all in the sense of the conversation on changing maybe I don't know if it's desire or the presumption that it was that person's intent?
There comes a point where we had to decide between our sanity and our peace and the search for answers. And there were so many unknowns, so many hurdles. We sought out certain, we asked for help and it just wasn't there. So we said at some point you have to decide, do you want to keep going down this path seeking answers, and what good will that do anyway? or do you just want to grieve and move forward with this new reality? And so that is a very heavy question, and it's very personal. I don't, there's people that have decided to pursue all the details of what could have happened, and I honor that. For us, it was just more like, it's not going to change a single thing. And even if we find out, there's no proof. So what good is that going to do for anybody? So we decided to just let that question go.
Wow. I think it's really nice to sort of sit with that and just realize, yeah, like the amount of frustration one would go through pursuing usually an answer that can never be solved unless a person admitted it, if you ever found them and that sort of thing. And so I can sort of see how that dream and just that perspective can shift to focus on other aspects of the grief that can be sort of worked through and healed from, where that one was, you said, like it's an answer that you never could. And so it would actually, I would think, complicate one's grief. And so as you sort of move forward with this loss, I would like to also know, like, what does it mean to lose a sibling? Because I know that is a specific loss that I haven't, had to experience in my lifetime at this moment. But I know it can be such an impactful for the living sibling.
Thank you so much for that question. He was, like I said, I'm his older sister, but there's also this motherly aspect, this motherly element, this caretaker element. I always said I'm his keeper. So it is like losing a limb, like losing a physical part of yourself. I always say there's a part of all of us that left that with him that day. And to some degree it did. And actually that's a good thing, like it's okay. It honors the reality of this loss. He is the person that he's my memory keeper, and you lose an entire library of memories forever that, nobody to validate your memories, nobody to have those inside jokes with, nobody who he's the only witness that I had on this planet who I didn't have to explain myself to. He just understood me. There's no caveat, no explanation, no small fine print, nothing. He just understood me. He brought lightness to my life that I haven't had since. And he knew how to calm me down. I'm a pretty highly anxious person, I would say. And he just, without words, knew how to calm me down, knew how to bring me peace and hope, and be a sort of guiding light in my own life as well. So losing that, they say, with sibling loss, especially your only sibling, you lose your past, present, and future. It's almost like there's an entire reality that was deleted. And when you meet a new person that doesn't know your history, having to explain your sibling or that you're not an only child. And speaking of which, when I went back to work after he passed, I remember a colleague said, well, now that you're an only child, what are you, and her words faded to the background. I don't know what she said after that, but I said, oh my gosh, I'd never thought of myself that way. He didn't have children, so I'll never know what it's like to be an aunt. He never got married, so I didn't get to have that experience. I will never get to see him, the adult version of himself, of our adult version, so as siblings. And the thought of having to bury my parents alone is probably the most terrifying thought that I try not to think about. But that moment, if life plays out that way, then that's something that I think about quite often, is just feeling like you're really lonely in the world despite the people that know you.
Wow, yeah. That's very interesting to hear about, said, like, losing your past, present, and future, and also who he was to you. I think it's just like so important about, sort of providing that hope and that peace in this crazy world we live in. And so with all that going on, I know you've sort of transferred to doing some grief education and work and increasing awareness through your podcast. And so I'm really kind of curious what brought into that, because is that giving you some hope and meaning and different piece that was missing in that time?
Absolutely. So it was more as an exploration of what was happening to me, since I couldn't talk to my parents about it, not because they were not open, but because they're grieving the loss of their son, and I don't want to add to that. So I found myself feeling extremely lonely in this experience, with no reference as to, am I okay? Do I need help? Like, what's happening? Am I going crazy? So all these questions of, is this normal, to a degree? So I started, I'm naturally curious. So I started looking for research, looking for books, nothing on sibling grief, especially adult sibling grief. And I noticed, as somebody I spoke with, she said, she also lost both of her siblings, and she said there's more literature on pet loss than there is on sibling loss. So the reference point is that we are called the forgotten mourners because everybody asks about the parents, like, oh, your parents are grieving. I can count on one hand in 5 years how many people have asked me how I am doing, right? And it's almost like your grief as a sibling is not relevant. It's very overlooked. So I said, well, if it doesn't exist, let's create it. Let's start having these conversations. And the podcast called my name. So in that journey, I started to help myself, and then I help other people along the way. The dreams and more metaphysical aspect of it helped tremendously because it gave me reassurance. It's not tangible evidence. Some of it you could kind of say it is, but it's not hard evidence that it's real, but there's a peace in knowing that it exists and you don't have to prove that to anybody.
Well, I think that's where you get that confidence from in your own beliefs, is that as you walk, you feel confident of what you believe and your experiences, and those really shape you. And so I'm really excited to sort of talk about these dreams and other experiences you may have had that really shaped you to become the person you are today, because it, as you said, like it helped you through your grieving process to heal and to also expand probably, I guess, your understanding and the deepness on which your faith is probably based on now, the way you're talking about him. And so please, I guess, like, talk about maybe the first one and then how that all led to 200.
There's so many. So I'll preface it with the following. The week that my brother passed, we were all in my grandparents' house. Some people deal with it in a way that they would never step foot in the place where that happened. We were the opposite. We didn't want to leave that place. It was like, there's his energy still there. Some of his things are still there. He's there in our ability to be together at that time. So I remember my grandfather has a big library of very random books, a lot of metaphysics and spirituality. And I found this book called Into the Light by Betty Eadie. Never heard of it, it just caught my attention. The cover caught my attention. And I happened to open it to a random part and it said The Tunnel. And I was like, what is this? I started reading in chapter 7, The Tunnel, and I finished it, I think, a few hours later because I could not stop reading. Her book was about near-death experiences. And that's the first time in my life I had heard about a near-death experience. And I was very conflicted because initially she's talking about how she met Jesus and all these things. And I was like, who is this woman to think that she met the Jesus? Like, how dare she? But it was something that piqued my curiosity because it was an answer in a non-religious context, even though she's talking about Jesus, but it wasn't a religious teaching. It wasn't somebody telling you this is what happens in the afterlife. It was, hey, this happened to me and this is what I saw. And then it got me curious about that world. I started to consume videos on YouTube about near-death experiences nonstop for, I think, the first 3 years. But I preface it with that because I found some commonalities in the stories. Whether they're true or not, I don't care. That's irrelevant to me. I just saw common threads in the storytelling that opened my mind up to how you can communicate with somebody you love in the afterlife, right? And it got me believing in the afterlife. So I said I could choose to think this is absolutely crazy, or I could choose to approach it with curiosity and play with the idea, right? So that opened me up to even thinking there was more to life than this, right? Not because I didn't believe that before, I've been raised Catholic, my parents have their spiritual beliefs, but it was just not relevant. It's not something that occupied any mind share, like any of my thoughts until now. It's like, where did you go? You were literally FaceTiming me yesterday. Where did you go? And I needed to desperately find those answers. So with that in mind, one common element is that a lot of the communication is not with words, it's with symbolism and energy and experiences. So when I first had the first dream was the night after he passed away. And it was my cousin actually who, I guess, obviously he found out about it, but he called my mom at 5 o'clock in the morning, or he texted her and he said, I was going to wait to tell you this, but I can't because I cannot go back to sleep. I had a dream about him. He came to me in my dream and he said he was sorry he had to leave this way, that he loves me very much and that he's okay. And then he left. And my cousin, sorry, my cousin said that that's the first time he realized that there's an afterlife because he didn't think that way. So that was day one, the following day. And from there, different people in my family started to have dreams. But my first dream was about a month after he passed. And the first dream was we were in this pitch black place. It felt like an outdoor place, but it's pitch black. And there's this bench, this curved cement bench, and we're sitting next to each other. And I know it's him. And there's profound sorrow and sadness. Like we know what happened, and it was so painful. And we're both, kind of with our elbows to our knees and just kind of staring at the ground. I know he's to my left and I'm sitting to his right, and we're just kind of staring at the ground, very sad, not knowing what to do. And he just says something about this broken body. If I could just fix this broken body. And I said, you were never broken. You were never broken. And he says, I didn't mean to. How can I come back? And I say, you can't. And we were both crying. And I said, you can't come back. And then he's like, but I need to come back. And I said, you can't. So I told him something to the effect of just follow the light. Like, just, you have to keep walking, just follow the light. And then I woke up. And that dream was so incredibly distressing because one, it was felt so real. And it was my worst fear that he would regret or he would be in a distressed state. And that in a way confirmed it. So it was very terrifying. It was very distressing for me as well. So that was the first one. That was in October. I think a few days later, I had another dream where, again, we were in this pitch black place and I see his outline. Like, I don't really see him. I see his outline. His eyes are closed. He's walking towards me with his eyes closed. And I know it sounds creepy, but it wasn't. And all of a sudden he looks up and he opens his eyes and his mouth towards the sky. And I see this like super bright laser beam of light coming out of his mouth and eyes. And I know, again, that sounds creepy, but it wasn't in the dream. And immediately the understanding was, this is what I am now. Like, I am light, I am this energy, and I am light. And those beings, meaning our spirit selves, cannot exist in this world meaning this dense human form. And it was a very clear understanding that, one, I still exist. I am pure energy. I'm so much energy that even one being in that state coming here is enough to like decimate planet Earth. It's so powerful. Like, the amount of energy is so big, and so we have no concept of that here. And that was my understanding. That was him saying, I can't come back because I exist now in this form. You are that too, or you will be that too, but not in your current form. And so it was kind of like explaining to me what he is now, what's happening, all these things. But the dream that really just felt like a visitation, I've had so many, like you said, and feel free to pause me anytime. I could keep going about this. The dream that felt the most vivid, because these were all vivid, but this one felt like a real visitation, was in November. So he passed away September, so this is a few months afterwards. And I was working in real estate at the time. So in my dream, I'm showing my grandparents an apartment in Miami Beach. That's where I live. I live in Miami. So it was like, hey, your retirement home, let me show you this apartment. It was like an Art Deco building. I go to the second floor and I'm in this U-shaped kitchen waiting for my grandparents to finish touring the house. And my brother walks into the kitchen and I'm at the end of it. He walks in and I look at him. I understand that he has passed. In my dream, I understand he has passed. So this visitation is unusual. I collapse to my knees and he walks towards me looking peaceful, healthy, vibrant, just fresh faced, so healthy, so happy, so healthy, so peaceful. And he walks towards me. He's wearing a white t-shirt. And I remember there's these golden specks of light kind of, flickering around him very gently. And I remember he gets down, he helps pick me up, and he holds my face with both of his hands. And he says, I see everything. I see everything. And his words were, I see everything, but I understood that meant, and it's amazing. And I have no words, so it's completely pointless to describe it. But this is the feeling. It's the feeling if you got to travel to outer space and you get to see galaxies and Lord knows what else, like have these very mystical experiences. And then you try to explain it to a 2-year-old, what you just saw. Like, he's like, there's just are no words. Trust me, it's amazing. And I hugged him and I remember feeling the density in his body, like the density of the hug. And when I went, I was crying, he had his chin on my shoulder and I could feel my tears on his shirt, like it was so real. It was so real. At that moment, I realized he lives in a different way. Like, it was just, I have no doubt anymore. I don't care what anybody says. I shared these dreams with my parents, but I didn't share them with anybody else because they felt so sacred. And I didn't want the magic to be tainted by anybody's opinions. So I wrote them down on the notes section in my phone. This is where I write all my dreams down. And it just, that gave me so much peace. I've heard you say that about the dream with your father, and same, it just gave me so much peace to know that he was okay. And I had no doubt. I know what people think about the way that he passed, and certain beliefs people have about the afterlife and whether or not you're dreaming with them. I respect people's, if that helps people, if that's useful for somebody to believe that, great. For me, it's not. And the feeling of the dream proved otherwise. The nature of the dream for me proved otherwise. And it was beautiful. So that's another one I had.
Wow. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing those few dreams. But you could sort of see even how they progress from being very distressful to being very almost enlightened, and just allowing to lift your spirit on a belief that A, there's something more, and that, there's this peace, that he's at peace in his own way, and he's almost like happy. And I think there's something that is enriching for our soul, and we can even see an image like that, like just even in a moment of time of that taking place. And so I'm just always excited to hear how these dreams can shift people's belief systems in ways that helps them live a better life. That's awesome. I love it. And so thank you for sharing that. And I'm always really happy when people are sharing within their families, because a lot of times I hear that they don't, because they don't want other people to get jealous, because if they don't have a dream, then they're going to feel like maybe left out, or wonder why. And so some people just don't talk even within family. So it's nice how your family kind of talks about it and can sort of, spread their own dreams, with each other. I think I love that idea, and I love that you guys can do that.
Thank you. Like dreams and signs and everything. And, I've heard your episodes where you say the more you are open to it, the more you practice writing them down, the more you become able to, I don't know if attract is the right word, like have more grief dreams. And there were others that had real life impact. Like, if I have time to share that one, there was one in January 2020 where I was walking in a desert with him. He was in front of me and I'm walking behind him, and all of a sudden he starts sprinting and I'm chasing after him, and we go over this thorny bush, and we're literally running on top of this thorny bush, and I'm just looking at his feet because I'm trying to step exactly where he's stepping. So the point is, like, step by step by step, follow his steps, right? So then we get to this clearing, and it was like Joshua Tree, California, which I later found out my uncle and his girlfriend at the time, they planted a tree in Joshua Tree in my brother's honor. I didn't know that at the time. In any case, so I'm dreaming this. We get to this clearing, and my uncle's girlfriend at the time, there's a platform, and she's doing yoga in the middle of the desert. And then I see my dad, my uncle to my left, my brother and I to the right. And my father and my uncle are doing yoga in jeans, and we are laughing because I'm like, who does yoga in jeans? Like, oh my gosh, that's so difficult, right? And then, we're doing the yoga poses and looking at my uncle's girlfriend at the time. I wake up. I know that sounds very simple, but what's interesting about the way the messages come through is that once I have those dreams, I wake up, I still keep my eyes closed to just sit with the feeling of the dream. Once I do that, it amplifies, it brings more details, and the messages start coming through of what that dream meant. In that dream, I understood the future will require you to be flexible. It was about being flexible. My dad wearing jeans was inflexibility, and then us doing the regular yoga was flexibility. So, and that my brother's guiding us every step of the way, even though it's a difficult, thorny path, right? So it was very clear. I wrote the dream down, didn't think twice about it. So this was January. February, I'm working in real estate. My manager calls me. She says, hey, you've been identified as one of the people to work in this new like luxury sales development. It's a position a lot of people want. Would you be interested? I was so deep in my grief that I didn't, I was hesitant, but I said, let me just go to the interview and see what it's about. So that was a Wednesday. I go to the interview. The developer sits me down and he's throwing numbers at me and quotas and things and expectations and this. And all of a sudden, I'm not even listening to him, to be honest, because I'm feeling very overwhelmed. I'm thinking, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. In order to not cry in front of this man, because I was feeling very emotional, I cut the gaze, I look over to the side, and I didn't realize that the suite that we were sitting in was suite 119. But from my perspective, because I was on the other side of the glass, looked like 911, 9/11. That's my brother's, that's the date he passed. So something in me felt very calm all of a sudden. And I said, maybe I am supposed to be here. Let me just calm down for a second. And then I came back to center, listened to this gentleman. He said, okay, so if you're in, you start tomorrow. And I was like, oh, that's very fast. Okay. So I didn't think about it. I started, go through training, and all of a sudden, a few weeks in, I'm feeling extremely overwhelmed again. I'm thinking I said yes too soon. I should have thought about it a little bit longer. I can't do this. I'm so sorry. So I go to our vice president, who was the liaison between this developer and our team, and I say to him, I'm so sorry, too soon, sorry. And he says to me, he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, I understand this could be a little bit overwhelming, but it's just going to require that you're a little bit flexible, for you to be a little bit flexible, is what he said. And the moment he said the word flexible, the whole dream came back, right? It was like these two worlds collided. And I'm looking at this man and I'm thinking of the dream. And I said, this is what he meant. This is what he meant. I didn't know, this is February. I didn't know that the pandemic would start the following month, and everything would be shut down. So at the time, I decided to stick it out against, like, everything that I was feeling wanted to escape and go away. But I decided to stick it out because I was trusting that there was something bigger to this that I'm just not seeing in the moment. Everything shuts down, and I live in Florida. So it was March 17th, it closes, and everybody's worried about losing their job and what's going to happen, all the things that happened at the time we remember. The developer that we worked for at the time said, I don't want anybody to worry. We will weather this storm as long as we can, and you will be fully paid as agreed without interruption. Thanks to that, we were able to get out of debt. We were able to pay our bills. We were able to basically survive the pandemic and the shutdown without any interruptions. And I think that's ultimately what the dream was getting me to understand. So it had real world consequences here for something that happened. And following that one, I remember dreaming that he was driving a semi truck the way you would a speed car, like a race car. And he was, driving it like he was having so much fun. And I understood in that one that he's moving big energy and enjoying it. Like he's working his side over there and it's affecting us over here. And yet he's having fun doing it. So it's amazing how these messages come through. It really is.
Oh, that's phenomenal. I love how a moment in time, like just those words that the individual said, brought back the dream and like connected everything. And you're able to see, like you felt like a sense of peace, and you're like, oh, like I can do this. It gave you that reassurance that that there's something in you that needs to walk this path, and it's going to be okay. And there's something, I think that's just so amazing that even dreams can do that, right? Like how that moment can shape the decisions you make in your future, and you look back and reflect and say, what a great decision that was. Like what an amazing moment it was for you to be able to do that, as you said, because of the pandemic. And like a lot of people lost their jobs, and a lot of people still are unemployed because of it.
Unfortunately, yeah.
At that time, it just allows us to sort of, I think, walk a little lighter in this hectic world. Like there's so many things that are going on, and so much anxiety from others and ourselves and the news and everything that kind of like takes the joy out of life. Like your brother, as you said, like in that dream, he's driving this, semi truck, fun, but like how often are we walking through life not having fun? Because like we are also all driving these semi trucks. Like we have this huge weight of like everything. We're trying to do jobs, life, family, friends, but yet a lot of times it feels heavy. Like we're just, like we're just doing the motions rather than actually enjoying these aspects of life.
Right. And he had a phrase, he always said, life's little pleasures, LLPs. He's like, oh, I'm enjoying LLPs. And it was the magic of the mundane. And that's something that I've adopted since his passing. Even yesterday, I posted about it. It's really slowing down to appreciate the little things in life that really ultimately are the big things in life. I remember when he passed, I'm looking at the pictures and I have pictures of highlights like birthdays or family events or all these things. And I said, what I miss the most is the mundane, like his everyday character. And I wish I took a picture of him sitting on a chair or eating breakfast or some random thing, because I miss that the most. And so it's this appreciation for the everyday little things that are so much more magical than we realize. And that was, a lesson. And paying attention to the little signs as well. And if I may share one last thing, I know I could share forever. There was like 200 of them, but what, dreams use your language in order to communicate. What that means is each of us, through our lived experiences, have developed some type of language that is very unique to us. And so a lot of times people ask me, like, how did you get this meaning from that? And it's like, well, that's just something very personal to me. Like, I understand it deeply beyond doubt that that's the message. And each person has their own version of that. So when you dream, if you're questioning, don't take it so literal. Just feel intuitively what you think that meant and go with that meaning that feels right. And so, for example, another thing is the dreams that I have sometimes use certain words that I wouldn't normally use. And I'll give you an example. So I always ask, my biggest question to him is, where are you? Like, is it a place? Is it a galaxy? Where, like, how does this work? Where are you? And if it's not a physical place, which obviously it isn't, but I want to have some sort of reference, even if I barely understand it. So he came to me in a dream and he says, oh, I'm with Javid. And I'm like, Javid, who's Javid, right? But I look up the name and it says it's a name of Persian origin and it means eternal, immortal, living forever. So I'm with the living forever, with the eternal, whatever that means. I said, okay. Another dream he gives me, he says, I have to go for a while. I'm going to the next level. I have to go and I'm not going to be able to visit you anymore. He said that to me. And he gives me a succulent. And I'm crying because I say, I don't want this succulent. I want you to come visit me. And he said, I'm sorry, just keep this succulent. And I look up the meaning of the word, of the symbolism of a succulent, and it says enduring and timeless love. So succulents are representative of enduring and timeless love. So he's giving me this as a gift. He still visited me afterwards, but there was some months in between where the dreams did stop for a while. So whatever happened there, he's able to come back and say hello again. And what's happened recently is, like you said, as a family, and I'll end with this, but my family, we agreed that we would share the dreams and signs and whatever, just be very open about it because it would be the closest thing to seeing him or to hearing from him. And everybody's open to it in whatever way resonates with them. My mother the other day asked where he was, and I had a dream, and he said, I'm in blah blah blah. He said this word that it's not any language I've ever heard, couldn't remember it. Even in the dream I said to him, I don't think I'm going to be able to remember that name, it's really difficult. And then he says, don't worry, it's in the Bukhara galaxy. And I was like, the Bukhara galaxy, okay, cool. And I remember, I would remember that because it sounds like a children's rhyme we have in Spanish, which is Kukara Makara Titere Fue. It's a children's rhyme. And it rhymes with Kukara. So I said, Bukara, Kukara, I will remember that one. When I search for the name Bukara to see if it exists, it's Swahili for a secret place. So no answer there, but I thought it was very interesting that he's like, I'm in a secret place. Like, you're not supposed to know about it, right? And these things happen all the time. I told my mom and she says, oh my gosh, I was just asking him yesterday. And then the last one happened 2 nights ago. He told me, I saw this in a kind of like a scroll looking thing that my mom was reading in my dream. And I understood that it was a message from my brother to tell my mom to read it out loud, right? So kind of give this message to her so she could read it out loud. And the message was, I expand my reasons to keep going. Up there where you are, so too I reside. Those were the words. And I don't know how I remember all of them, but it kept echoing in my mind. And so he's basically telling my mom to say, I expand my reasons to keep going here on earth. Up there where you are, where my brother is, so too I reside. And I understood that to be that a part of her is with him, even though she may not realize it. But right now, her priority is to be here and find reasons to be here. And I thought that was very profound. That's the last one I've had. That's dream 201 to date.
Wow. Oh my, oh my. That is so
It's a lot.
beautiful. It's
Yeah.
so beautiful, and so beautiful that your mom could have those answers too for her, as it seems that she may not be having as many as you.
Right.
With and like the difficulties that she is facing, like for you to have a dream that's meant for her in a way is
Right.
very telling versus like how you're doing, right? And how you're processing the grief is probably much different. And so it's always found it fascinating when dreams are also meant for other people. Like there's a direction from the deceased to say, you know, like talk to this or share this with whoever, because it means that they're probably in a place where they're not able to, for one reason or another, have those dreams to be able to hear that stuff. And so I think that's really beautiful. And you have so many different dreams and stuff. So out of the 200, I'm just very curious, are all of them in your mind visitations, or do you feel somewhere like just dreams of like dreamlike kind of like normal kind of dreams that you normally would have? Or do you see a difference in any of that?
Very much so. I would say about 95% are regular dreams and about 5% would be visitations. It's actually very rare. I gave you some very strong highlights, but those would be the highlights. Everything else is more just dreamlike.
Oh, that's so interesting. Is it like a feeling then when it comes to you knowing it's a visitation, or is it something that you get like wisdom or guidance from?
So for me, the difference is one, when I interact with him, he feels tangible. He feels dense. There's a density to his existence. In the other dreams, it's more floaty, airy, just abstract. The second is that in the dream, I realize there's an awareness that I'm talking to him, that his response is not, he's actually responding to me. And there's a sense of wonder, even within the dream, about the type of interaction that we're having. So it feels there's an awareness that this is an unusual interaction.
Wow, okay. That's interesting to hear. Cool.
Yeah. And, one thing that just came to mind right now, I remember when he was a kid, he had this book he was obsessed with, and it was about lucid dreaming. And that's how I learned about what lucid dreaming is in the first place. So I figured, looking back on it, if he's going to communicate with us in any way, that's probably a clue as to how he's going to communicate with us. So I'm very open to whatever comes our way that way through dreams.
Yeah, I'm always interested too. And like, it seems that you have there's some kind of connection there where you're able to remember these dreams more often than maybe some other people, more than me, it seems. And so it's interesting just to know that people do have a different level of frequency and the ability to remember some of these dreams and how special that is. Like, talk about the simple moments in life, right? Like, dreams can be these moments that can really allow us to sit in whatever that is, that mystery, that love, to be able to walk a little differently. And so thank you so much for just being on the podcast and sharing a few of your dreams. And I think just opening up is just the way we all normalize these experiences, but also can learn from each other in the sense of, how to process grief, but also what dreams are occurring. For me, I think it's fascinating. It gives me hope. I walk differently when I hear some of these stories, especially these like comforting and positive stories that change people. And so I thank you for sharing those. And so one of the last questions that I'd like to ask is if you could have a 202 dream of your brother or someone else who has died, what would that dream look like to you?
Honestly, it would probably be my brother, unless, but it's the question that I keep asking, and he keeps avoiding in a way, but I would someday like like a home tour. I would like to know where he's living right now. I want a home tour of where he's living right now. I think that would be pretty cool. And if he has any pets, he loved animals, so I'm wondering if he has any pets. That would be it.
I love that. Okay, that's great. Where do you think, like, what was his desire to live when it came to like places on Earth? Did he have like a certain dream?
He was all about nature. He was so simple. He was so simple. He loved the outdoors. He loved anything with a river, waterfall, mountains. So he would definitely be somewhere with a beautiful outdoor view or backyard or access to the outdoors for sure.
Okay, that's cool. That's beautiful. Okay, so we're just wrapping up the podcast. And so where can people find you and find more of your stuff, your podcast, and everything that you're doing?
Sure. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for this time and this opportunity. Every time I get to share, it just feels like I get to experience a little bit of time with him in a way. So thank you for this. You can find me at griefandlight.com. Anywhere on social media, same handle. And I just opened up my YouTube channel. So if you are on YouTube and want to see some of my interviews as well, just feel free to visit that and follow me. And I'm very active on Instagram mostly. So if you feel like, sharing a dream or a message or being curious about this interesting world of grief, which most people think is very sad. And there obviously is sadness to the loss, but there's also a lot of hope. Like you said, there's also a lot of joy in sharing your memories. Feel free to reach me on Instagram as well.
That's beautiful. So once again, thank you so much for sharing and being here today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Black. It's been an honor.